I am very pleased to welcome onto the show the official spokesperson for the Embassy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C., to talk a little bit about some of the issues going on as far as oil price. That's an issue of concern, what's happening with COVID-19 and how that's being handled in the Middle East, as well as the changing and I would say improving relationship between the United States and our partners in the Middle East. Fahad Nazer is the official spokesperson for the Embassy of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C., and he joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Sir, can you hear me? And welcome to the show.
Yes, I can. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. So let me just ask you first of all, because we're seeing this coronavirus pandemic impact people all across the globe. It has no national borders. How is Saudi Arabia handling this COVID-19 crisis?
Right, so the kingdom is doing everything it can to protect the health and well-being of both Saudi citizens and residents in the kingdom. I think that the Saudi leadership determined very early on that this virus had the potential to be a pandemic, the likes of which the international community had not seen in a long time, and therefore we acted very quickly and we acted decisively. We took some very important precautionary measures to prevent the virus from spreading inside the kingdom. So, for example, we closed all schools and universities. We suspended international and domestic flights. We also instituted a curfew in most major cities. We also suspended visits to the holy mosques in both Mecca and Medina. And I think as a result of all these early and decisive measures, we have been fairly successful in containing the virus inside the kingdom.
So when it comes to COVID-19, I mean, obviously there are a lot of internal matters and how each country handles their own affairs. You were just explaining what the kingdom is doing internally. There are also situations, since they cross borders, different crises, different wars and incursions around the globe that are taking place. Of course, Saudi Arabia has been engaged in Yemen, and there's a ceasefire going on now as a result of COVID-19. I want to ask you a two-part question, sir. First is, if you could explain to us what Saudi Arabia has been doing in Yemen, and then also the nature of the ceasefire that's happening, why and how that came about.
Right. So if I could just add, since you said, since we are talking about COVID, and you're absolutely right, this is a pandemic in every sense of the word, I think it's important to mention that the kingdom is the president of the G20 group this year. So in our capacity as president, we actually held a special virtual summit of the leaders of the group back in March to focus the international community's attention on finding a coordinated response. So after the meeting was convened, and the member countries resolved to do a number of very, very important things, including sharing critical information that will help us understand how the virus acts and how it travels. They also resolved to exchange material that is necessary to protect healthcare workers. They've resolved to increase research and developments on therapeutics and potential vaccines and things like that. A week later, actually it was last week, the kingdom pledged $500 million in support of this international effort that will be going towards developing and deploying new diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. So that's very important. Obviously, this has been the main story for much of the world, and the kingdom is no exception. Now, when it comes to Yemen, obviously Yemen has been in the news for a long time. It is a complicated crisis and conflict, as is the case with, frankly, with all conflicts. But what I'll try to summarize it this way: what the kingdom wants is very simple. It wants a stable and secure Yemen. It is obviously a neighbor of ours. It's an important country. We have been supporting the internationally recognized government of Yemen to push back against these incursions by this Iranian-backed militant group known as the Houthis. Saudi Arabia did not start this war. We did not want it. It was a war of necessity. It was not a war of choice. But we are doing everything we can to help restore peace and stability back to Yemen, including supporting all the efforts of the United Nations and the United Nations Special Envoy Martin Griffith, who's trying very hard to bring the warring parties back to the negotiating table in Yemen.
Again, we're talking with the official spokesperson for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C., Fahad Nazer, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I want to ask you for your thoughts. I mean, we've seen a couple of different congressional resolutions that have been passed against the United States support, American support from the Trump administration of Saudi Arabia's involvement in Yemen. What have you made of those resolutions, and what do you make of President Trump continuing to say no to Congress on those congressional resolutions and maintain support in Yemen?
Well, I think that the Trump administration has a very good understanding of that danger that the kingdom faces, not just in Yemen, but in general. It's unfortunately the Middle East is a dangerous region. The Houthi rebels, which are backed by Iran, Iran has had this project for the past 40 years. It started it in Lebanon by creating this militant non-state actor known as Hezbollah. It is trying to do the same thing in Yemen, and that is simply not acceptable for us. I think that the United States and Saudi Arabia are in complete alignment when it comes to stabilizing Yemen, because we see it as having the potential to, unfortunately, there's a potential of being another failed state, a state that can provide safe haven to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but also it could potentially fall prey to the machinations and the expansionist designs of Iran, which has been wreaking havoc in the region for the past 40 years. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia are working very closely on stabilizing Yemen, but they're also working very closely together on countering the threat that the entire region faces from Iran.
Let's talk a little bit more about the dynamics in the Middle East vis-a-vis Iran. Fahad Nazer, our guest from the embassy in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian embassy in D.C., who's the official spokesperson there. One of the things that I have noticed in the Trump administration over the past few years is a new and stronger understanding of the threat that Iran has posed to the region and to the world. It's something that clearly, Gulf Arab states and Israel have been aligned on more and more closely, it seems. And here, our president has worked very hard to foster a stronger relationship, it seems, with our Arab partners, and also helping to bring the Arab nations such as Saudi Arabia more closely with Israel, particularly because of this common threat of Iran, which is opposed to the Obama administration, which really worked hard to get that Iranian nuclear deal put together, which clearly means Saudi Arabia, Israel, other Gulf Arab states were recognizing, hey, this is not working, this nuclear deal. The Trump administration clearly recognized that as well and withdrew. I wonder if you could please tell us a little bit more about how the kingdom views the threat of Iran, and also how the United States, now under the Trump administration, has been approaching that threat and overall relations with Arab states such as Saudi Arabia.
Right, so Iran really has sought to destabilize the entire Middle East and to provoke conflict for the past 40 years. It has violated every law, every convention, and every norm of the international community. It has supported militant groups around the world, backed terrorist attacks in places as varied as Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Kuwait, Iraq, Argentina, France, Germany, and even here, right here in Washington, D.C., where about 10 years ago they tried to assassinate the former Saudi ambassador to Washington. So they have no limits. They have sought and continue to destabilize the region. Most recently, they obviously orchestrated this attack on our oil infrastructure back in September of last year. This was not simply an attack against Saudi Arabia. It was an attack against the entire global economy. Unfortunately, this is simply what they do. They, for whatever reason, they thrive on chaos. They want to destabilize the global economies, not just the economies of the region. And the two main countries that have been standing in the face and countering these nefarious activities have been Saudi Arabia and the United States, and we have been working on it very, very closely together for many years. Saudi Arabia fully supports the Trump administration's maximum pressure approach. We fully support the economic sanctions because, unfortunately, Iran, the Iranian regime, I should say, does not respond well to carrots. It only responds to sticks.
Now, in terms of the relationship with the United States under the Trump administration, as I mentioned before, we are seeing a little bit more of at least, let's say, congeniality a little bit with Israel and nations like Saudi Arabia, especially because we recognize that there is a common enemy in Iran. Can you tell us a little bit about how the kingdom views its current relations with Israel, especially over the past 2 or 3 years?
Well, the kingdom doesn't have any relations with Israel. The kingdom's policy towards the peace process has been very consistent, going back certainly back to 2002 when the late King Abdullah presented the Arab peace process back then. That offer is still on the table. It does provide a path forward for a two-state solution. It provides a path forward for a comprehensive and just peace for both Israel and Palestinians to live side by side. We have not changed that position. We are hoping that the Israelis and Palestinians go back to the negotiating table to end this conflict. Obviously, it has been the source of so much, frankly, hardship and suffering in the region, but it has also provided fodder for terrorist groups and militant groups that pay lip service to it to try to recruit and to radicalize young men across the region. So the Middle East, it will be very difficult for the Middle East to have any semblance of peace and stability until that conflict is resolved.
What do you make, and what does the kingdom make at this point of the President Trump's Peace to Prosperity plan, the Middle East peace proposal that he has put forward? One last question relative to that topic.
Sure. I mean, the United States, we view the United States as one of our strongest and closest partners and allies. The U.S. is a force of good in the world, and it is certainly a force of good in the Middle East. It has played a role in inking peace agreements that are related to this main conflict between Israel and Palestine. Obviously, the U.S. played a role in the peace agreements between Israel and Jordan and Egypt before that. We fully anticipate that the U.S. will play a constructive role in getting this most important agreement between the two main adversaries in this crisis as well.
Again, we're talking with Fahad Nazer, who is the official spokesperson for the Embassy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C. Just a few minutes left with you, sir, and I want to shift, of course, to news that has been on top of mind for global markets for weeks. Once again, kind of heating up a little bit this week has been the price of oil production. Just a couple of weeks ago, a deal was struck, United States helping to facilitate a deal with OPEC, Saudi Arabia, of course, leading member of OPEC, and also Russia in terms of cutting production. Can you tell us a little bit about how that deal came about and what Saudi Arabia's view is on the reduction in production at this point in time? I have seen reports that perhaps we may see OPEC reduce production a little earlier than originally anticipated, especially as we're seeing this reduction or decline in the price of oil of late this week.
Right. So the kingdom has always put a high premium on stable international energy markets. It has always promoted moderate prices that are fair to both producers and consumers, and it has also stressed the importance of burden sharing among producers for the long-term stability of markets. As you said, Saudi Arabia was instrumental in inking this historic agreement among the OPEC Plus nations that reduced production by 12.5 million barrels a day. We have also secured additional commitments from some of our G20 partners for a little over 3 million barrels more. We are continuing to have discussions, as you said, with other nations, including with the United States, to see what's the best way to stabilize prices and to stabilize markets. Oil is an international commodity. It is traded in international markets. And this steep decline will absolutely need a global response. And I think we're making progress. It's my understanding that oil prices went up significantly today, and hopefully that's a good sign.
Just also on this topic, one of the issues that countries across the globe, the United States, companies in the realm of oil, as well as Saudi Arabia and others that are saying, okay, we're going to reduce the amount of oil that's being put onto the market. One of the ways in which that's being done is to store oil. Can you give us any insights into how Saudi Arabia is looking at storing oil, or is it just going to be a reduction in production? I think that's something that a lot of market analysts are curious about.
Right, so our main remedy, and this is what we've proposed to every other country, is obviously a reduction in production. And I think the agreement that was agreed to on April 14th was really historic in every sense of the word. I think it's a very good, necessary and first step, but I think there's room for further cuts. The kingdom itself is going beyond the commitments that it has already made, just to help bring back stability to the markets. Now, having said all that, I think we cannot overlook the fact that this COVID-19 pandemic has really put a tremendous strain on the global economy, and one of the things that it obviously impacted is a reduction in demand for oil. It has reduced demand by possibly as much as 30% globally. So, this is really the main challenge we have. So, this is an added incentive for us to get all our resources together to try to stop the spread of this virus that is, frankly, wreaking havoc around the world.
And finally, Fahad Nazer, our guest, very much appreciate the time, official spokesperson for the Embassy of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C. Obviously, the Middle East, as all regions are, is a very complicated place. And there are a lot of things that the American people have as far as understandings of our relationship with Saudi Arabia and with other nations there. What do you think the American people should know about the partnership in some areas that the United States has with Saudi Arabia, especially as many are concerned and say, hey, we have too close ties with Saudi Arabia? Just give a little message from the kingdom, please, on that regard, why this relationship with the United States is important and of value to both sides.
Sure. So this year actually marks the 75th anniversary of the historic meeting between the late King Abdulaziz bin Saud, who was the founder of modern-day Saudi Arabia, and the late President Franklin Delano Roosevelt aboard the USS Quincy. In the 75 years since, this relationship has continued to deepen and to broaden and to strengthen under both Democratic and Republican administrations, I might add. I think the relationship is in many ways multidimensional. It has political, military, security, and economic components. We have accomplished a great deal over the past 75 years. For one, we defeated global communism together. We expelled the invading forces of Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. We helped the United States and Saudi Arabia work very closely to defeat and to expel the terrorist group ISIS from Syria and Iraq. We have also worked, and we continue to work very closely on countering Iran's malign activities in the Middle East and beyond. This is a great relationship. It is mutually beneficial, and we certainly look forward to it continuing to strengthen and to broaden.
Fahad Nazer, official spokesperson for the Embassy of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C. I really appreciate your time. I know we went a little longer, but thanks for bearing with us, and I hope this is the first of many conversations we can have.
Yes, please. I really enjoyed talking to you, and please, I'd love to come back and talk some more.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you taking the time, and stay well and be healthy.
Thanks. Same to you.
Once again, Fahad Nazer joining us from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He's the official spokesperson of their embassy in Washington, D.C. Very interesting conversation, to be sure. So many different facets to these issues. It is a complicated region to... You just watched a clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel today. You want to catch our live show. And I love your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.